Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to go off my script just very briefly, a couple of anecdotes about the Tizard Mission. Some 25 years ago, I has recently hired tenure-track assistant professor, and I was in Cambridge doing some research on what I hope to be my next book. I was at Churchill College, and as I was working on various radar scientists, I was told by the archivist there that the papers of another radar scientist by the name of E.G. Taffy Bowen had just been released because his memoirs had just been published that week. And I looked at his papers, and I was quite interested in what they had to say, and I went down to London that evening and managed to purchase his book. And I read his book, his memoirs, and in the book was a passage which is the sort of thing that changed my life, and that in his memoirs, and of course he's one of the members of the Tizard Mission, he said, "I'm very surprised that no one has written the history of the Tizard Mission." Here is the number of the files in the British National Archives. I wish someone would write it. I dropped my research project that night, proceeded to the British National Archives the next day, and the rest, as we say, I hate to say this, is history. Tizard is a figure that has been, I think, has been increasingly rehabilitated in the United Kingdom, but he has mostly been forgotten about. When I started this project, I wanted to get Ronald Clark's biography of Tizard, a rare book, and I went into one of those old bookstores that used to line Charing Cross Road in Britain, and I was just come from the archives. I wanted to see if they had a copy of the book, and I walked in. I was filthy, I was dirty. I'd just been on the tube for about an hour and a half going out to Kew, and I had ripped jeans on, looked like a graduate student, which I'd recently been, and I walked into the suit with this man with immaculate three-piece suit, and he very properly, and I'm not going to try to do a British accent, asked me what I wanted, and I said I'd like a book called Tizard. The man thought he was being very clever, and he said to me, Tizard, is that some form of lizard? And I just looked at him with my best mid-Atlantic accent. I said, no, it's a biography of Sir Henry Tizard, perhaps the most important wartime British scientist. Thank you very much. They did get me the book. Now, when Randy Papadopoulos called me in September to remind me, because I'd forgotten that it's the 75th anniversary of the Tizard Mission, I was overwhelmingly pleased to be part of this, because I can't believe that this is the only event that's being staged to commemorate the 75th anniversary of this extremely important event. And so what I'm going to do now is to really summarize very briefly my book for you. And let me begin on October 1st, 1940. Alfred Loomis, the investment banker and inventor, met with his first cousin, the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, at the War Department. Loomis reported on an extraordinary series of meetings he and other American scientists had held with their British and Canadian counterparts over the previous 10 days, meetings which would transform the course of the Second World War. Loomis came in full of excitement about the benefits of technical cooperation with the British or Tizard technical mission. He said, we are getting the chance to start now 2 years ahead of where we were, and we were getting infinitely more from the British than we could give them. This statement fascinated Stimson, since his first cousin's great scientific knowledge and practical business sense made him unlikely to exaggerate. Stimson called in General George Marshall, the Chief of Staff, for a briefing. Loomis outlined to Marshall the extraordinary knowledge freely given to the United States by the British. Marshall and Stimson left the meeting convinced that this new special relationship of technical and scientific cooperation with Great Britain and the Commonwealth would play a significant role in their efforts to ready the United States for its entry into the World War. What they could not know was that this special relationship would continue long after the end of the conflict, in fact, to this very day. The British Technical Mission, better known as the Tizard Mission, after its first leader, Sir Henry Tizard, and I should point out there were two leaders of the Tizard Mission. The other man who actually headed the mission longer than Tizard was John Cockcroft. I'll talk more about him in a bit. They arrived in North America 75 years ago. The free, open, and almost total exchange of top-secret military technology and information between non-allied nations is a unique event. Even 3 months before the mission's departure, it would have seemed highly improbable that either nation would agree to such a free-ranging transfer of knowledge. In 1917, the British and other allies had provided the United States with all of their new weapon systems developed in the 3 years of fighting in the trenches that preceded the United States' entry into the First World War. The armistice brought an almost immediate end to the temporary wartime alliance, and by early 1919, most military technical cooperation had ceased. In 1938, with the British Armed Forces rushing to mobilize for another war, the Royal Air Force reached out to the United States Army Air Corps for information on the Norden bomb site. Press reports had praised the site's capacity to aim bombs with pinpoint accuracy, but provided no technical details. The RAF approach to the Air Corps met with a polite rebuff. The Air Corps referred the matter to the United States Navy, which had developed the site. The Royal Navy then tried to arrange a quid pro quo with his American counterpart, but intense negotiations collapsed due to mutual technical chauvinism. It was only in the spring of 1940, with the war in Europe well underway, that a new British initiative to restart Anglo-American military technical cooperation commenced. The initiative did not come from the military, but from scientists. Since 1935, scientists had revolutionized the RAF's air defense system by inventing radar and developing techniques for its incorporation into fighter command. The radar development program had been overseen by the Committee for the Scientific Survey of Air Defense, or the Tizard Committee. The success of the radar program had brought scientists into the forefront of RAF's command structure. At the start of the war, Tizard was made scientific advisor to the Chief of Air Staff. Tizard pushed for cooperation with the Americans, and in early 1940, the Air Ministry agreed to send a one-man fact-finding mission to the United States. Tizard selected Nobel Prize-winning physiologist A.V. Hill to go. Hill had an extensive military research experience in the First World War and had been a member of the Tizard Committee. In April, Hill met with leading Americans, including Vannevar Bush, the president of the Carnegie Corporation, and James Conant, president of Harvard University. Hill also had lengthy discussions with Lord Lothian, and here's a man that really is often forgotten as being key to this story, the British ambassador, who became an enthusiastic supporter of open technical cooperation with the Americans. Hill and Lothian dismissed the chauvinism that had hampered earlier negotiations, stating that American technology was at least on par with the British, and reaching the startling conclusion that it was obvious that the Americans too had discovered radar. Everyone Hill met supported the British cause, and many were actively working to get the U.S. to join the war effort. Given the chaos that broke out within days of Hill's report of his findings, it is not surprising that his suggestions were not considered for several months. The fall of France and the uncertainty of Britain's position with the loss of its most important ally was a major factor. Perhaps even more important was Winston Churchill's appointment as Prime Minister. Just prior to assuming the premiership, Churchill was briefed by Admiralty Intelligence, which believed that any technical information imparted to the Americans would be immediately leaked to the Germans. This is serious. This is what they believed. Moreover, Churchill was furious with the American government because of its lack of aid and continuation of the insurmountable restrictions of the Neutrality Acts. Only intense pressure from the Air Ministry, Hill, and Lothian, as well as President Roosevelt's decision to provide Britain with surplus rifles, persuaded Churchill to approve the mission on the 30th of June. As soon as he was advised of Churchill's decision, Lothian offered a full and frank exchange of technical and scientific information, and on the 22nd of July, President Roosevelt approved the British proposal, offering almost all American secrets with the exception of the Norden bomb site. Throughout July, British officials debated the composition of the nature of the mission. Only after rejecting half a dozen candidates was Tizard selected to lead the enterprise. Tizard structured the mission to focus on radar, the technology that appeared to be making the difference in the RAF's historic battles against the Luftwaffe in the skies over Britain. Tizard selected Professor John Cockcroft, the famous atomic physicist who was then in charge of British Army's radar research, and Dr. E.G. Taffy Bowen. And there are two Bowens in this story. One's British, one's American. They shouldn't be confused. An almost unknown scientist whose top-secret pioneering work on small radar sets would greatly impress the Americans. 3 military officers with recent operational experience with radar completed the team. In the weeks leading up to the departure, the scientists began to assemble the information and samples to turn over to the Americans. Indicative of Tizard's determination to be open with the Americans, he ensured that one of the first cavity magnetrons be brought to America. The magnetron, only invented in the winter of 1940, made microwave radar possible. No microwave radar was yet in service. Only 10 pre-production magnetrons existed beyond the laboratory prototypes. Tizard decided to make no mention of the magnetron until a suitable, dramatic moment presented itself. Tizard also made several key political decisions which would shape the mission. First, acting on advice from Hill and the realities of the geopolitical situation, Tizard decided that much of the mission's work would be in Canada. Canada was now Britain's most important ally and the only one with a large untapped industrial resource. Unlike the US, Canada did not demand hard currency, and they were prepared to build weapons of British design. Reports from Lothian indicated that the Americans expected a broad exchange, and Tizard envisioned utilizing British and Canadian technical experts already in North America to fill the gaps. On the 14th of August, Tizard flew on ahead of the other members of the mission. After a week in Canada, Tizard arrived in Washington on the 22nd of August. Tizard anticipated that several weeks of preliminary negotiations would be necessary before work could begin. However, most Americans were in fact anxious to begin learning about British combat experience with modern weapons. Some, however, were less than enthusiastic. Admiral H.G. Bowen, there's the other Bowen, the director of the Naval Research Laboratory, told the Chief of Naval Operations that the information on radar and sonar received from the British would possibly prove disappointing. As he said, for a nation that had been so backward in mechanical and electrical engineering as applied to naval vessels to have established outstanding progress in 2 other fields of engineering does not seem credible, although it might be possible. To be fair to Bowen, he does change his mind. Tizard was forced to improvise. For instance, Canadian National Research Council scientists and Army officers were called on to provide information on chemical warfare. A.E.H. Pugh, an Admiralty sonar specialist in charge of establishing production in Canada, and Royal Canadian naval officers exchanged information on anti-submarine warfare with their USN counterparts. These early exchanges established several important aspects of future cooperation. Any lingering technical chauvinism was swept away, while most U.S. officers acknowledged they had gained much more than they had given. The British found a number of American innovations invaluable. However, these included the duplexer switch, which made it possible for radar sets to have only one antenna for transmitting and receiving. The Americans were so impressed, not but by the British technology, but also by the friendly and frank nature of the discussions, that they began to further remove restrictions on the mission. The British and Canadians were invited to visit top-secret military labs such as NRL and the Air Corps facilities at Wright-Patterson, and to begin exchanging information with industrial science at companies such as Bell Labs. By 9th of September, when the rest of the mission arrived in Washington, only the Norden bomb site was still protected. The British, in turn, only provided the sketchiest details of Whittle's jet engine, something I think we'll be hearing more about in another paper. Cockcroft and Taffy Bowman brought with them crates of equipment, documents, and combat film footage. A highlight was the unveiling of the ASV radar set, small enough to be mounted in a patrol craft. The pace of information exchange accelerated dramatically, but only in mid-September was the last important restrictions on the British delegation lifted. The members of the mission received permission to begin discussions with the new civilian scientific agency, the National Defense Research Committee. It was once these meetings began that the mission's influence moved beyond the realm of technical cooperation into the transformation of the very nature of the United States' scientific mobilization. In order to understand why British scientists had such a profound influence in North America, it is necessary to digress briefly to an overview of the situation in the United States in this autumn of 1940. In July, Vannevar Bush, working in cooperation with other scientific leaders, approached President Roosevelt to request the creation of a civilian scientific agency to manage America's scientific war work, Bush deliberately staged an end run around the military technical branches. The military demanded that the NDRC only fund research which did not duplicate current Navy and Army investigations. One such area was microwave radar, which was deemed impractical based on the limitations of existing vacuum tube technology. By the time of the arrival of the Tizard Mission, Bush and other American scientists were not so sure if the NDRC would have a significant role in managing military scientific research. NDRC-sponsored microwave research under the leadership of Loomis at his private laboratory at Tuxedo Park in New York had made little progress prior to the mission's arrival. Now, the British, of course, had brought with them the cavity magnetron. If the British had provided only that, it could still be argued that the Tizard mission profoundly influenced wartime American science. Literally overnight, this ingenious device made practical microwave radar possible. The magnetron transformed Bush's dream into reality by changing the experimental microwave research program into one of the most important fields of investigation in the entire rearmament program. With the magnetron, Bush later recalled, "We ran away with the ball." On the 19th of September, the British unveiled the magnetron to a group of American and Canadian scientists in Loomis's room at the Wardman Park Hotel. I understand there's going to be a plaque put in there sometime soon. The Americans were astonished to learn that this small device could produce more than 100 times the power of the best klystron tube then available. It was only after this meeting that Loomis rushed to Henry Stimson to brief him on his extraordinary breakthrough. And this X-ray picture here is actually the X-ray taken at Bell Labs of that magnetron that's out in the foyer here. It is extraordinary that it survived, and you folks should be really pleased that it's here because it's an extremely, extremely rare piece of technology. There was, however, much more to the mission's influence than merely providing the technical means. Bush, Loomis, and other American scientific leaders realized that the small research program at Tuxedo Park would no longer suffice. Rapid decisions on how to structure an immensely larger laboratory were undertaken. And by the end of 1940, the basic organizational model of wartime American microwave radar research was established. At a meeting at Tuxedo Park in October, Cockcroft and Bowen briefed their American colleagues on the organization of British radar establishments. Loomis quickly agreed that the new American microwave research facility, the Radiation Laboratory at MIT, should closely follow the British examples. The new laboratory would be run by civilian scientists and would maintain close links with both the military and industry. The equally difficult problem of staffing the new facility was also discussed at great length. Cockcroft and Bowen, this is after Tizard had actually left, described how university people had taken to military research programs in Great Britain like ducks to water. Since industrial and military scientists already had their own crucial role to play in the growing rearmament program, universities provided the only untapped source of technical talent available. The vital role played by the Tizard mission in bringing the magnetron to the United States and in the initial planning for the radiation laboratory is the single most important direct result of this unprecedented international cooperation. As a direct consequence, microwave radars were in large-scale production in American factories by the time of the attack on Pearl Harbor, at least a year and a half sooner than would have otherwise been the case. And indirectly, the Rad Lab ensured that Bush's NDRC, later made part of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, would become the most important scientific agency in the United States. The Rad Lab organizational model would in turn influence other wartime and post-war American military research facilities, including Los Alamos. The Tizard mission, however, didn't just influence the United States, it also had a profound impact on Canada. In late summer of 1940, Canada was beginning to move away from its traditional reliance on Britain to a formal alliance with the United States as its continental defense partner. The key role played by the Canadians in this earliest stage of the mission ensured the country would be included as an integral member of the special relationship. Just prior to his return to England, Tizard laid the basic groundwork for a large-scale production of radar in Canada. Meeting with C.J. Mackenzie, the president of the Canadian National Research Council, and C.D. Howe, the powerful Minister of Munitions and Supply, the Canadians approved plans for a Crown-owned research enterprise, a Crown-owned company. And just before I switch these slides, this is a group of the members of the Tizard Mission arriving in Canada, actually for later missions in October. That's John Cockcroft there. This is the first time these pictures have ever been seen in public. They were provided to me by Chris Cockcroft just 2 weeks ago, the son of John Cockcroft. So the Tizard Mission led to the establishment of Research Enterprises Limited. The approval was based on Tizard giving the Canadians the assurance, by the way, assurance he did not have permission to give, that the desperate need for radar sets in Britain, that large-scale British orders for radar would soon materialize. That was not necessarily the case, and John Cockcroft, on his return, had to fight desperately to get those contracts. The mission had created, however, the willingness to make major commitments in Canada to advance technology production in the highest reaches of Canada's political, military, scientific, and industrial leadership. The legacy of the Tizard Mission was, of course, much greater than merely accelerating the development and production of radar in Canada and the US. Almost every area of advanced military technology and science was transformed by the sharing of information and resources. The success of the Tizard Mission influenced attitudes in Washington, Ottawa, and London, and became one of the key events in the forging of the special relationship emerging between the three countries. We must see the Tizard Mission in the same light as the Destroyer for Bases deal, as a stepping stone leading to the passage of the Lend-Lease Act, and to the formal staff talks which would ensure coordination of strategic goals after Pearl Harbor. It is fitting that the seminar on the 75th anniversary of the mission was organized by the American Navy, held at the Canadian Embassy, with an evening reception to follow at the British Embassy. The legacy of this mission continues to this very day. Thank you very much.